The midday sun hammered down on Liberty Pines estates, bleaching the identical beige vinyl siding of the houses and glinting off the perfectly aligned, HOA-mandated mailboxes. It was a neighborhood conceived in the key of conformity, a meticulously planned suburban landscape designed to radiate an aura of impeccable, undisturbed order. This tranquility, however, often felt less like genuine peace and more like a tightly wound spring, policed with unwavering vigilance by Beverly McNamara, the undisputed and often dreaded president of the Liberty Pines Homeowners Association. Beverly, a woman whose tightly lacquered helmet of permed hair seemed impervious to wind or reason, viewed herself not merely as an administrator, but as the righteous guardian of the neighborhood's very soul and, more pragmatically, its property values. To Beverly, soul and character were synonymous with adherence to a narrow, unchanging, vaguely traditionalist aesthetic she considered inherently American. Property value, conversely, was directly threatened by anything or, increasingly, anyone she personally deemed out of sync with this rigid vision. Her neighbors, especially those unfortunate enough to have transgressed the labyrinthine dictates of the CC&R's covenants, conditions, and restrictions, had bestowed upon her a whispered, fearful moniker, HOA Karen. Beverly's own house was a testament to her philosophy, aggressively manicured. Its lawn glowed an unnaturally vibrant green, likely achieved through chemical intervention, bordered by rigidly pruned boxwoods standing like stoic, unsmiling soldiers. Excessive patriotic bunting often festooned her porch railings, regardless of the season, a display that seemed more about aggressive assertion than genuine sentiment. She leveraged her HOA presidency, combined with a self-appointed leadership role in the mostly dormant neighborhood watch program, as justification for an intrusive level of scrutiny into the lives of those around her. Her self-declared mission was the maintenance of standards, a term that, in her usage, had become increasingly synonymous with resisting any perceived deviation from her preferred, homogeneous norm. A few houses down the meticulously cleaned street from Beverly's fortress of conformity resided Sergeant Major retired Alejandro Ramirez. Mr. Ramirez was a man approaching his 80th year, his weathered face a roadmap etched by decades of sun, wind, and experiences he rarely spoke of. Despite a slight, persistent limp, a tangible souvenir from a forgotten firefight in a jungle halfway around the world, decades ago, his bearing retained the quiet, upright dignity shaped by 30 years of dedicated service in the United States Army. He had moved to Liberty Pines a year after the passing of his cherished wife, Sophia, seeking the advertised quiet of the suburbs and proximity to his devoted daughter and lively grandchildren. He was a man of deeply ingrained routine and profound reserve. His interactions with neighbors were polite, marked by a certain formal courtesy, a quiet, "Good morning, ma'am," or a respectful nod, but he seldom initiated conversation, content in his own company. All he truly sought in this final chapter was peace, a quiet space to tend his memories and his garden. And oh, his garden. It was Mr. Ramirez's sanctuary, his most tangible connection to Sophia, to the vibrant heritage they had shared, to the earth itself, situated in his modest backyard. It stood in stark, beautiful contrast to the sterile, HOA-approved landscaping surrounding it. It wasn't a muted palette of acceptable petunias and geraniums. It was an explosion of life, a sometimes unruly but always lovingly tended patch bursting with purpose. Sturdy tomato plants, staked with meticulous precision, stood heavy with ripening globes of red and orange. Zucchini vines sprawled with enthusiastic abandon. Dense clusters of fragrant cilantro and pungent epazote perfumed the air, mingling with the sharp, earthy scent of several varieties of chili peppers, from the mild, fleshy poblanos Sophia used in her signature child's rellenos to the fiery habaneros he grew mostly out of tradition, their heat a familiar echo of home. He cultivated herbs Sophia had relied upon in her cooking, their scents evoking vivid memories of her bustling in their kitchen. He grew vegetables they had planted together for decades, first in small base housing plots, then in larger gardens as his career progressed. Each plant was a living thread to his past, a testament to resilience, a defiant splash of color and culture, blooming incongruously amidst the beige conformity of Liberty pines. The physical act of gardening, the turning of soil, the careful watering, the patient weeding was his therapy, a grounding ritual that eased the ache of Sophia's absence and provided a quiet counterpoint to the lingering echoes of a life lived under vastly different, often harsher, circumstances. His tool shed, visible from the side yard, was a model of order, tools cleaned after each use, hung precisely on designated hooks, a habit ingrained over decades where readiness was paramount. Beverly McNamara had eyed Mr. Ramirez's garden with suspicion from the moment the first strange seedlings emerged. It looked wrong, disorderly, unkempt, in her view. Despite Mr. Ramirez's obvious diligence, more damningly, it looked foreign. The plants themselves were unfamiliar, exotic, certainly not among the pre-approved species listed in Appendix C section 4 of the HOA landscaping guidelines. The pungent, unfamiliar smells wafting on the breeze offended her sensibilities. The peppers looked suspiciously vibrant, unlike the pale bell peppers she occasionally bought at the supermarket. This visual and olfactory otherness immediately tripped Beverly's internal alarms. Her suspicion, nourished by a wellspring of latent xenophobia she skillfully disguised as civic concern and rule following, began to germinate. Mr. Ramirez, with his Hispanic surname, his reserved demeanor, and his cultivation of these alien plants, simply didn't fit her rigid template for a Liberty Pines resident. He disrupted the visual harmony. He was an anomaly. Her campaign began subtly, with anonymous notes slipped under his door. Friendly reminder, please adhere to approved neighborhood landscaping guidelines, see Appendix C. When the garden continued to flourish, she escalated to formal HOA violation letters, citing non-compliant flora, unapproved vegetation, and demanding immediate removal. Each letter was meticulously documented, copied to the rarely convened HOA board. Mr. Ramirez, a man who had faced down far more serious threats with quiet courage, found this bureaucratic harassment profoundly wearying. He disliked conflict, especially in his own home, but he could not bring himself to dismantle this living piece of his heart, this connection to Sophia. He attempted reason. He approached Beverly respectfully, explaining that they were simply vegetables and herbs for personal use, assuring her he kept the plot tidy and contained, expressing the simple joy it brought him. He even, remembering Sophia's generosity, once offered Beverly a small bundle of freshly picked cilantro. Beverly recoiled physically, pulling her hand back as if he had offered her a snake. This neighborhood isn't about your personal joy, Mr. Ramirez, she had retorted, her voice tight with barely concealed disdain. It's about maintaining collective standards and protecting our property values. These weeds you insist on growing are an eyesore, potentially invasive, and bring down the aesthetic character of Liberty Pines. Consult the approved plant list. Compliance isn't optional, it's mandatory. Her hostility seemed to intensify in direct proportion to Mr. Ramirez's quiet, unwavering refusal to yield. He wouldn't argue, wouldn't raise his voice. simply nodding politely while making it clear, through his continued cultivation, that the garden would remain. This passive resistance enraged Beverly. She began watching him more intently, her gaze sharp and critical, tracking his movements from behind her pristine window blinds. His natural reserve she interpreted as deliberate evasiveness, suspicious secrecy. His occasional conversations in Spanish with his daughter or grandchildren when they visited became, in her mind, irrefutable proof of his otherness, his refusal to assimilate. He didn't belong. He was different. He was other. And in the increasingly distorted echo chamber of Beverly McNamara's mind, fueled by a cocktail of prejudice, boredom, and a desperate need for control, others seamlessly morphed into illegal. The foreign plants weren't just unapproved landscaping. They were evidence. Proof that he wasn't supposed to be here, enjoying the perceived benefits of her meticulously maintained neighborhood. Proof, somehow, that he was hiding something far more sinister than non-compliant zucchini. She began to genuinely convince herself that this quiet, elderly man, patiently tending his vegetable patch, represented a tangible threat to her authority, to the neighborhood's integrity, perhaps even to the very fabric of the nation whose flag she displayed so performatively. One sweltering July afternoon pushed Beverly past her breaking point. She stood rigidly behind her immaculate living room window. Watching Mr. Ramirez across the street, he was kneeling, his movements slow but precise, carefully tying his burgeoning tomato plants to sturdy stakes he'd driven into the earth with practiced efficiency. His two young grandchildren were with him, their happy, high-pitched voices, a fluid mix of English and Spanish, drifting across the quiet street as they helped him water the rows of chili peppers with small, brightly colored watering cans. Beverly saw none of the warmth, none of the intergenerational connection. She saw only suspicious activity. She heard only foreign chatter, further confirming her deeply biased narrative. This mingling of languages, this vibrant, alien garden thriving in her neighborhood, it was an affront. It was the final straw. A surge of righteous indignation, mingled with a profound and staggering ignorance, propelled her away from the window. She marched into her small, overly organized study, bypassed the local police non-emergency number, ignored the contact information for the HOA management company, and instead picked up her phone. With trembling fingers, driven by a conviction unburdened by facts, she dialed the national toll-free tip line for point-use immigration and customs enforcement, ICE. Yes, operator, I need to report highly suspicious activity, she began, carefully modulating her voice to convey urgency and civic alarm. It's here in Liberty Pines Estates. There's a man, Alejandro Ramirez, I believe is his name. He claims to live at 14 Oak Drive, but frankly, I have serious doubts. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. He looks illegal. Definitely Hispanic. He speaks Spanish constantly, hardly any English at all. This was a deliberate, malicious falsehood. Mr. Ramirez's English, though accented, was perfectly fluent, honed over decades of military service across the globe. And his yard, she continued, warming to her theme. He's got this entire, illegal garden, growing all sorts of strange, foreign plants, things you never see around here. Certainly not HOA approved. It looks terrible. Brings down the whole street. Very, very suspicious. I think he's probably hiding something back there. She paused for effect. And people. There are always different people coming and going from his house, speaking Spanish. Different cars. Another gross exaggeration of his daughters' and grandchildren's regular visits. I strongly suspect he's undocumented, Beverly stated with unfounded certainty. He's negatively impacting our property values. And frankly, He just doesn't fit in here. He makes the rest of us uncomfortable. You really need to send someone to check him out. Investigate him. Quickly. As a final, calculated touch. She added, given his evasiveness and the strange goings-on, he could even be dangerous. For all we know, we residents feel unsafe. She poured every ounce of her accumulated prejudice, paranoia, and spite into the call, skillfully painting a portrait not of an elderly veteran tending his vegetable garden, but of an invasive, potentially threatening foreigner undermining the community. Because the call involved specific allegations against a named individual, included claims of suspicious activity potentially related to concealment, and was delivered with a tone of urgent concern by someone identifying herself with an official-sounding title, HOA President and Neighborhood Watch Captain. The tip was flagged for follow-up, standard operating procedure in such cases, particularly when potential evasion or risk factors were alleged, involved dispatching field agents to investigate the claim's validity and verify the subject's status. Less than an hour later, the quiet afternoon torpor of Liberty Pines Estates was broken by the arrival of two dark, unmarked SUVs bearing discreet government license plates. They pulled up smoothly, parking directly across the street from Mr. Ramirez's modest beige house. Three men in civilian attire, polo shirts, slacks, practical shoes, emerged. Despite the casual clothing, their alert posture, the coordinated way they moved, and the discreet bulges under their windbreakers indicating tactical vests broadcast their identity, federal agents. Their approach was swift, direct, and inherently intimidating as they walked purposefully across the street, not towards the front door, but directly onto Mr. Ramirez's lawn. Beverly watched, hidden behind the sheer curtains of her living room window, a sickening surge of vindictive triumph tightening her chest. Justice. Order. She was protecting her neighborhood. She was doing the right thing. Finally, something was being done. Mr. Ramirez was kneeling beside his rows of peppers, carefully loosening the soil around the base of a poblano plant, humming a quiet, melancholic tune Sophia had often sung while cooking. He looked up, blinking against the sun, startled, as the three men strode onto his lawn, their presence an immediate, jarring intrusion. They bypassed his neat concrete walkway, their heavy boots trampling the edge of the meticulously kept grass he took quiet pride in. Alejandro Ramirez, the lead agent asked, his voice sharp, neutral, devoid of any introductory pleasantry. Mr. Ramirez slowly, carefully, pushed himself to his feet, his old knee throbbing in protest. He automatically wiped his soil-stained hands on the sides of his durable work trousers. Yes, he replied, his brow furrowing in confusion. Can I help you, gentlemen? We're with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The agent stated flatly, momentarily flashing a badge clipped to his belt. We need to see your identification, please. Proof of legal residency or United States citizenship. Now, Mr. Ramirez stared, his mind struggling to process the words, ICE, here, on his lawn, asking for his papers. It was utterly incongruous, nonsensical. Immigration, he repeated, the word feeling alien and absurd on his tongue. I think there must be some mistake. There's no mistake, sir, the second agent interjected, his gaze sweeping dismissively over the vibrant garden, lingering on the unfamiliar plants, then settling on Mr. Ramirez with an undisguised, assessing suspicion, precisely the suspicion Beverly's venomous call had intended to cultivate. We received a credible report regarding this address. We need to verify your immigration status. Please provide your documentation immediately. The suddenness of it, the aggressive stance, the demanding tone, The inherent accusation in their very presence, it began to crack the surface of Mr. Ramirez's carefully maintained composure. Something cold, a dread he hadn't felt so acutely in years, washed over him. It mingled with the unwelcome resurgence of hypervigilance, a state of heightened awareness he thought he had mostly managed to relegate to the past. His breathing became shallow, quicker. Suddenly, these men in polo shirts didn't just look like government officials performing a duty. Their posture, their unwavering stares, their invasion of his personal space transformed them into perceived threats. Authority figures questioning his fundamental right to exist, to occupy his own small patch of earth. The feeling was terrifyingly familiar, an echo of hostile interrogations, of being cornered and powerless in zones of conflict far from this quiet suburban street. His hands, veterans of countless tasks requiring strength and precision, began to tremble almost imperceptibly. "My papers," he stammered, his mind racing, trying to connect the dots, trying to grasp the enormity of the insult, the sheer wrongness of the situation. They are inside the house, on my desk. But why is this necessary? What report? "Sir, we're not required to disclose the source. Just comply with the request," the lead agent insisted, his voice hardening noticeably. Mr. Ramirez's slight tremor, his hesitation born not of guilt but of profound shock and the triggering of deep-seated trauma, was clearly being misinterpreted as suspicious evasion. Precisely the narrative Beverly had so skillfully woven. Let's not make this any more difficult than it needs to be. By now, the sight of federal agents confronting the quiet elderly man in his garden had drawn neighbors out of their air-conditioned houses. Doors opened, faces appeared in windows. Some watched with detached curiosity, others with growing unease. Beverly McNamara, unable to resist savoring her perceived victory firsthand, emerged onto her own porch across the street, arms crossed tightly, observing the scene with an air of smug, righteous satisfaction. This was her vindication playing out in real time. "What's going on over there?" called out Sarah Jenkins, Mr. Ramirez's immediate neighbor, a kind-faced woman in her 50s who often exchanged pleasantries and gardening tips with him over the shared fence. "Mr. Ramirez! Alejandro! Are you all right?" The agents pointedly ignored her, their focus remaining locked on Mr. Ramirez. "Sir, your identification." "Now," the lead agent repeated, taking another deliberate step closer, subtly encroaching further into Mr. Ramirez's personal space. "Or you will have to come with us for processing." The threat, though veiled in procedure, hung heavy and menacing in the hot, still air. The injustice, the public humiliation in front of his neighbors, the sudden, terrifying resonance with past traumas where compliance with unreasonable authority was often the only path to survival. It all coalesced, overwhelming Mr. Ramirez's reserve. The carefully constructed peace he had cultivated in this small garden, this small life, shattered like fragile glass. "Come with you," he whispered, the words barely audible. He shook his head slowly, disbelief warring with a rising tide of long-suppressed anger. "Be processed. After everything." His gaze lifted past the impassive faces of the agents, settling momentarily on the American flag flying proudly, almost mockingly, from Beverly McNamara's porch. Then his eyes dropped to the rich, dark soil beneath his worn boots, the soil of the nation he had sworn to defend, the nation he had bled for, a lifetime of service, of discipline, of sacrifice made without fanfare, surged within him, tightening his throat, bringing hot tears close to his eyes. Tears not of fear, but of profound, weary sadness and a sudden, burning indignation. pushed beyond a limit he hadn't known existed within this quiet retirement. His voice trembling, but imbued with a sudden, unexpected resonance, an echo of a command presence long dormant. He drew himself up. He stood straighter, consciously ignoring the sharp protest from his knee, his shoulders squaring almost instinctively. "You demand my identification," he said, his voice low, yet carrying with startling clarity across the lawn. He met the lead agent's gaze directly, holding it. "I am Sergeant Major Alejandro Ramirez, United States Army, retired." He saw a flicker of surprise, perhaps, but no recognition in the agent's eyes. He continued, the words coming out steady now, fueled by righteous anger. "My serial number is 345-12-8769. I served 30 years on active duty." He paused, taking a ragged breath, the memories flooding back, sharp and unwelcome. "I fought for this country in Vietnam." Another pause. "I fought for this country in Desert Storm." His voice grew thick with emotion, the next words costing him dearly to utter in this context, feeling like a violation of something sacred. "I am a recipient of the Medal of Honor." The words fell into the sudden, stunned silence. "Awarded by the President of the United States for actions above and beyond the call of duty in the Ia Drang Valley, saving the men in my platoon." His voice faltered. The visceral memory of that day, the chaos, the fear, the blood, the sacrifice, overwhelming him for a moment. With a hand that shook visibly now, not from fear, but from the tremor of remembered adrenaline and profound emotional upheaval, he reached into his back pocket. He pulled out his worn, familiar brown leather wallet. He didn't fumble for a driver's license or a state ID. He flipped it open deliberately to reveal his official Department of Defense military retiree identification card. The gold eagle seal of the United States seemed to gleam defiantly against the laminated plastic. He held it out. "Is this documentation sufficient for you?" The three ICE agents froze as if struck by lightning. Their eyes locked onto the military ID card, noting the rank, the seal. Then their gazes snapped up to Mr. Ramirez's face, truly seeing him for the first time, not as the vaguely defined, potentially illegal alien from a biased report, but as the man standing before them, Sergeant Major, 30 years of service, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Medal of Honor. The words hung in the superheated air, heavy, unbelievable, world-altering. The highest military decoration awarded by the United States for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life, above and beyond the call of duty. And they were standing on his lawn, aggressively demanding proof of his right to be here, harassing him in front of his neighbors, threatening him with detention because of a malicious, xenophobic report about his vegetable garden. A visible wave of shock, followed by disbelief, then rapidly deepening. Horrified shame washed over the agents' faces. The lead agent went pale, taking an involuntary step backward as if physically repelled by the enormity of their error. "Or, Sergeant Major Ramirez," he stammered, his professional mask crumbling completely, replaced by stunned, horrified respect. "Sir, my God, we had absolutely no idea." He looked helplessly towards his equally dumbstruck partners, who seemed incapable of movement or speech. The entire situation had inverted with catastrophic velocity. They weren't investigating an undocumented immigrant. They were publicly harassing and threatening a national hero. "Sir, there has been a terrible, terrible mistake," the agent continued, his voice now filled with profound, urgent apology. The report we received, the information we were acting on, it was grossly inaccurate. Sir, please accept our deepest apologies. He immediately raised his radio to his mouth, his voice low, urgent, and laced with panic as he requested immediate supervisor notification to their location, referencing erroneous report, verified military service, Medal of Honor recipient, potential false reporting incident. The gathered neighbors, hearing Mr. Ramirez's declaration and witnessing the agent's reactions, gasped collectively. Murmurs turned into audible expressions of shock and outrage. Sarah Jenkins covered her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. They knew Mr. Ramirez was a veteran, a respected member of their community, but the Medal of Honor, it cast the preceding scene in an even more horrific, sacrilegious light. Every eye on the street now turned, as if pulled by an invisible string, towards Beverly McNamara, still standing rigidly on her porch across the street. Her smug expression had dissolved, replaced by bewildered confusion, which was rapidly curdling into dawning, wide-eyed panic as the full, devastating gravity of her actions began to penetrate her consciousness. She hadn't just sixed ice on her quiet, elderly neighbor. She had done it to one of the nation's most highly decorated and revered soldiers. The next few minutes dissolved into a blur of controlled chaos. More vehicles began arriving, marked police cruisers summoned by the ICE supervisor, unmarked sedans disgorging grim-faced, higher-ranking ICE officials and senior police commanders, unbelievably. A liaison officer from the nearest military base, hastily dispatched after the urgent radio traffic mentioning the Medal of Honor, also arrived, his uniform stark amidst the civilian clothes and police blues. The scene instantly transformed from a questionable immigration status check into a major, multi-agency incident response. The focus shifted entirely away from Mr. Ramirez. He stood, shaken but erect, amidst his beloved plants, his dignity battered but intact. Sarah Jenkins and several other neighbors had rushed over, offering him water, a chair, words of comfort and apology, forming a protective, supportive circle around him. The senior ICE supervisor, a stern-faced woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing, conferred rapidly with her visibly chastened agents, her expression hardening with anger as she received their report. She listened intently, nodded curtly, then strode with purposeful, angry steps across the lawn, bypassing Mr. Ramirez entirely, heading directly towards Beverly McNamara's porch. "Beverly McNamara," the supervisor called out, her voice sharp and carrying, cutting through the low murmur of the crowd. Beverly flinched as if struck. "Yes. What is it now? Did they take him?" she asked, a pathetic, delusional shred of her earlier defiance still clinging to her voice. "MAAM," the supervisor said, stopping directly at the foot of Beverly's porch steps, flanked now by two uniformed police officers who had materialized beside her. "We have conclusively determined that the report you filed earlier today with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement was deliberately false, demonstrably malicious, and appears to have been substantially motivated by racial and ethnic bias." Her voice was cold, clipped, radiating fury. "You knowingly and willfully misrepresented the facts, causing federal agents and local law enforcement to conduct a baseless investigation. You have caused significant emotional distress to a resident of this community, and you have wasted considerable taxpayer money and critical public safety resources." Beverly's face crumpled completely. "No, that's not true. I was just concerned." He looked suspicious. The strange plants, the Spanish language. "I was being vigilant." "The suspicious man you reported, Mrs. McNamara. The supervisor cut her off sharply, her voice dripping with contempt. Is Sergeant Major Alejandro Ramirez, a 30-year decorated veteran of the United States Army, who served this nation with extraordinary distinction and is a recipient of its highest military honor, the Medal of Honor. Your concerns were nothing more than unfounded prejudice and bigotry, and filing false, malicious reports with federal law enforcement agencies is a serious federal crime. The supervisor paused, then nodded curtly to the police officers beside her. Officers taught place Mrs. McNamara under arrest. Arrest me, Beverly shrieked, staggering backward as the officers calmly ascended the steps towards her. You can't do this. I'm the HOA president. I own this house. I pay my taxes. I was just being a good citizen. This is an outrage. It's unfair. The only outrage here today, ma'am, one of the police officers stated calmly, his voice devoid of sympathy as he expertly and efficiently handcuffed her, despite her indignant struggles and protests, is your behavior. Beverly McNamara was led, sobbing hysterically and protesting her innocence in a stream of incoherent justifications, down her pristine porch steps and towards a waiting patrol car. News cameras, alerted by the escalating multi-agency response and frantic police radio traffic, had arrived just in time to capture her humiliating downfall. The self-proclaimed patriot and guardian of neighborhood standards arrested for racially motivated harassment of a genuine American hero. It was the garden, she wailed, her voice cracking, as they guided her firmly into the back seat. Those illegal plants, they don't belong here. He doesn't belong here. The car door shut, silencing her cries, sealing her fate. The story exploded. It wasn't just local news, it detonated across state, national, and even international media outlets. HOA Karen calls ICE on Medal of Honor recipient over vegetable garden. The headline variations were endless, but the core narrative was irresistible. The shocking juxtaposition of Beverly's ignorant, prejudiced accusations against the quiet heroism and profound sacrifice embodied by Sergeant Major Ramirez. The story ignited a firestorm of public fury and condemnation. Veterans groups across the country issued scathing statements, demanding accountability and respect for all who served. Hispanic advocacy organizations seized upon the incident as a stark, painful example of racial profiling and the dangers of weaponizing immigration enforcement. Civil rights leaders called for broader investigations into HOA abuses of power and urged reforms to ICE tip line protocols to prevent such malicious misuse. The incident became a potent national symbol of disrespect towards veterans, prejudice against minorities, the vulnerability of seniors, and the toxic consequences of unchecked bigotry masquerading as civic duty. Official apologies flowed from the highest levels of ICE, the Department of Homeland Security, and local city government officials, all expressing profound regret and assuring procedural reviews. Beverly McNamara faced the full, unrelenting force of the United States legal system, charged with multiple serious offenses, including felony filing of false reports to a federal agency, making false statements to federal officers, perjury, and potentially state-level hate crime enhancements due to the clear evidence of racial motivation. Her trial was swift and decisive. The evidence presented was overwhelming. The recording of her initial ICE call, filled with demonstrable lies and prejudicial statements, the detailed testimony of the ICE agents involved, recounting her allegations, and the subsequent discovery of the truth, the corroborating accounts of neighbors regarding her escalating harassment of Mr. Ramirez, Mr. Ramirez's own testimony, delivered with quiet dignity and devastating emotional impact, and the public revelation and reading of his official Medal of Honor citation, which left the courtroom in stunned, tearful silence. Her defense attorney's attempts to portray her as a misguided, overly zealous but ultimately harmless concerned citizen were systematically dismantled by the prosecution, which laid bare the deep-seated prejudice and calculated malice driving her actions. Found guilty on all major counts, Beverly received a sentence meticulously crafted to reflect the profound severity of her offense and its broader societal implications. 4 years incarceration in a federal prison facility, substantial financial penalties, and court-ordered restitution to be paid directly to Mr. Ramirez for the emotional trauma inflicted, as well as reimbursement to the federal and local agencies for the significant resources wasted due to her false report. The inevitable civil lawsuits followed, initiated by Mr. Ramirez for damages related to defamation, harassment, and emotional distress, ultimately stripping Beverly of her remaining financial assets, her meticulously maintained house in Liberty Pines, the beige bastion she had sought to defend through acts of exclusion and hatred, was sold under court order to help satisfy the judgments against her. Her name became, for a time, a national shorthand for ignorant bigotry and the spectacular self-destruction it could engender. In Liberty Pines Estates, the HOA board was promptly dissolved in disgrace, later reformed under entirely new leadership explicitly committed to principles of inclusivity, diversity, and neighborly respect over rigid aesthetic enforcement. The community itself, deeply ashamed and embarrassed by the national spotlight, rallied around Mr. Ramirez with genuine warmth and contrition. An official community gathering was organized in the neighborhood park, not far from Mr. Ramirez's house. Local officials, veterans representatives, and neighbors offered heartfelt apologies, honored his incredible service, and pledged to foster a more welcoming environment. A small plaque commemorating Sergeant Major Ramirez's service and resilience was quietly installed near the park entrance. Alejandro Ramirez, though undeniably scarred by the incident, an event that had crudely ripped the scab off old wounds and unearthed traumas he thought long buried, slowly, painstakingly, began to find his equilibrium again, back in the familiar, grounding solace of his garden. The confrontation had triggered weeks of restless nights, intrusive memories resurfacing with unwelcome clarity, a heightened sense of vulnerability that made him jump at sudden noises or unexpected visitors. The feeling of being targeted, of having his very identity questioned on his own soil after decades of defending it, left a residue of anger and profound sadness that took time, patience, and the quiet rhythm of his garden to process. He continued to cultivate his tomatoes, their familiar acidic scent a comfort. He tended his rows of peppers, their vibrant colors a small defiance against the beige conformity that had sought to erase him. He harvested his cilantro and episode, their pungent aromas filling his kitchen, connecting him to Sophia, to heritage, to the enduring cycles of life. The physical act of working the soil, feeling the sun on his back, watching things grow under his care, it became his anchor, his meditation, his path back to a semblance of peace. He spoke about it sometimes, haltingly, with his daughter or with Sarah Jenkins, acknowledging the lingering shadow, the scar that remained, but also the quiet strength he drew from the earth, from memory, from the simple act of nurturing life. Sometimes, standing amidst his flourishing plants in the late afternoon sun, he would pause, looking towards the now vacant lot where Beverly McNamara's house once stood. He felt not triumph, nor lingering anger, but a deep, weary sorrow for a life so poisoned by bitterness and fear. He knew, with the quiet certainty of a man who had witnessed the best and worst of humanity, that true community, like a healthy garden, blossoms not from enforced, sterile uniformity, but from diversity, mutual respect, and the shared human decency that allows each individual life to take root and thrive. His garden, once the target of hatred, now stood as a quiet, resilient testament to that truth, its roots running far deeper, far stronger than any HOA covenant or prejudice boundary could ever hope to control or contain. The peace he found there now was harder won, tinged with the knowledge of fragility, but ultimately, profoundly his own.